So we're going to be talking about ADHD as a developmental disorder of self-regulation. Now, in order to self-regulate, individuals have to have a suite of mental abilities, a faculty of mind tools, if you will, a Swiss Army knife of competencies that originate mainly in the front part of your brain and that we call the executive functions. Now, I know that ADHD is presented to you this way, as in the DSM-5. But let's understand that the DSM-5 is a description of someone's behavior by which we might recognize that they might have a disorder. It's not a theory. It's not an in-depth understanding. It's a superficial description of behavioral and cognitive deficits or excesses. And that is very useful in clinical practice because that is what people come to us talking about. But that's not what the disorder is. It would be like equating autism with awkward speech and hand flapping. Now, is that a theory of autism? Not by a long shot. But it's a description of some of the behavior we might recognize in someone who potentially could have autism. So that's why theories become important, because they go beyond the superficial, beyond the diagnostic criteria, the checklist, the symptoms, the requirement for ages of onset, and so on. And we go deeper behind the scenes, under the hood of the vehicle, so to speak, in order to give us a richer understanding of what is failing. And from that, what we might be able to do to help. So that's what we're going to do this morning, and I'm sorry if it comes at you very quickly, but like any good professor who's traveling, I have far more slides than I have time, and that means that rather than cut out a few slides, I'll speak fast. Right? So the DSM that you just saw is a list of the criteria that a clinician has to employ to make the diagnosis. It's great. It's evidence-based for the most part, although toward the end, before it gets published, it goes through a whole political ringer of concerns, and sometimes things get changed for political reasons, not for scientific reasons. But that said, it's not a bad description that we could use in clinical practice. But let me show you how a scientist would understand ADHD rather than a practitioner. As a scientist, we know that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that results in a delay in the emergence of two human traits that are neurologically based. And they are universal to our species, which means wherever you go on this planet, a human that is developing typically had better be manifesting these traits. The first trait that we talk about is known as executive inhibition. You know of it as the hyperactive impulsive dimension, but executive inhibition is a much better term for this. This is volitional inhibition. This is the willful ability to stop and then think about what you're doing before you act. But the stopping is what we want to emphasize here. The interruption of a behavior that is proving ineffective, and then taking the time to contemplate what that might be. But it is the inhibitory aspect of this that we emphasize here. Now, we see this disinhibition occurring across multiple domains of functioning, even though the DSM represents it by just 3 verbal impulsive items: talks too much, interrupts others, intrudes on conversations. And then gives us a smattering of activity level symptoms that are applicable primarily to young children and have no diagnostic value by adulthood. So the DSM represents disinhibition as if it was just excessive speech, when in fact it cuts across every domain of human action. So for instance, the individual shows deficiencies in motor control and inhibition. No surprise, over half of these children develop a developmental motor coordination disorder during childhood, because we're dealing here with something about inhibiting and regulating the motor aspect of the brain. But the second area of disinhibition is going to be in speech. So yes, we do see excessive talking, interrupting others, not giving the other person a chance. To get into a conversation with somebody with ADHD is to get into a one-way diatribe. There's no reciprocity, there's no give and take, there's no listening and responding and inquiring and questioning. The reciprocity, the social preening for which language partially arose in humans doesn't take place. It is a barrage of content, poorly organized, missing the point, and often you simply want to take them by the lapels and say, "What are you trying to say to me? Where are we going with this?" Right? So yes, there is a problem with verbal behavior in these individuals being very disinhibited. But let's look at the other aspects of inhibition that aren't mentioned in the clinical description, but are crucial for clinical management. The third is impulsive cognition. Thoughts are coming very quickly, poorly inhibited, very disorganized in the brain, so that we have a jumbled mess of ideas that are flying all around in this head that are not being edited, organized, monitored, executed in order to accomplish things. It's just a brain on dump. And as a result of that, we have an individual who cannot appropriately contemplate and organize ideas in order to accomplish something with those ideas, whether it's explaining something to you, or writing an essay, or carrying out a particular task that happens to have some complex sequences to it. Now, besides the cognitive impulsivity, what we also see is motivational impulsivity. This is just as important for treatment planning, because we have an individual who shows what economists call a high time preference. They want what they want when they want it. The individual immediate consequences are all that matter. The small rewards now are all we care about. What does that mean? If you put them in a situation in which consequences are delayed, and much of human life involves delay of gratification, they will fail. They're not interested in it. It has no value to them. It won't motivate them to pursue that activity. So we have an individual who is seeking small rewards now wherever they go, and if they can't get it from you, they're going to find somebody else to get it from, whether it's a peer, whether it's making people laugh, whether it's taking the eraser of their pencil and grinding it in the pencil sharpener just to make a lot of noise. Ha ha ha, wasn't that funny, right? You're going to have an individual who is a reward-seeking missile, and where is that reward going to be found? And if it's not with you, too bad. I'm not interested in what you're doing. I'm bored. So I'm going to move on and engage in what we call novelty or stimulation seeking in order to meet this need that I have of immediate consequences now. That's why 1 in 6 children with ADHD will have a video game addiction by the time they're a teenager, because video games play to this immediate gratification. So they find it very hard to disengage from anything that provides immediate rewards. But a lot of life involves delayed consequences. The entire educational system is founded on deferred gratification, which is why education is the most impaired domain of somebody with ADHD. It is demanding something of them they cannot fulfill. And that is a motivational impulsivity, so that the later reward is discounted, devalued, unimportant. Now, we all do that. The further out in time a consequence happens to be, the less valuable it is to us. That's why banks charge interest. It's why you won't just give money to somebody without getting it back plus something in return for the delay over which that money was unavailable to you, right? So when we think about interest rates or things like that, that is all based on this idea that humans value consequences that are nearer in time over ones that are further in time. But people with ADHD discount that future dramatically to where it simply doesn't matter to them at all. So what does that leave them with? It leaves them with a temporal impulsivity, which means if it isn't now, I don't care. They live in the moment.